a dramatic setback for the president of Afghanistan as he marks 1 year in office. Taliban fighters have taken over parts of the northern city of Kunduz. Their latest attack raises more questions about Ashraf Ghani's leadership. Can he rein in the Taliban? And just how strong is the Afghan government? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Jane Dutton. It's been 14 years since the Taliban government in Afghanistan was ousted. For the first time since their fall, Taliban fighters have seized parts of their former stronghold, the city of Kunduz. Located in northern Afghanistan, the transport hub is one of Afghanistan's wealthiest cities, home to more than 300,000 people. Government buildings, a hospital and courthouse are all under Taliban control. And the group also freed hundreds of prisoners from the city's main jail. Afghani special forces have flown into Kunduz airport to try to regain control. US airstrikes are also joining the fight, but without the aid of US and NATO ground troops who pulled out last year, government critics say it'll struggle to deal with the Taliban threat. Let's get straight on to this conversation with our guests in Kabul. Haroun Mir, political analyst and founder of Afghanistan's Center for Research and Policy Studies. In New York, via Skype, Omar Samad, senior advisor to Afghan Chief Executive Abdullah. In Kabul as well, Mujib Mashal, freelance journalist writing investigative features on Afghanistan. Very warm welcome to all of you. Omar Samad, you wonder how something like this can happen in Kunduz. The government has been warned extensively that this sort of thing was impending. What went wrong?
Well, the situation in Kunduz in particular has been shaky for the past few months, and the government has been very aware of this. I think that the situation overall in the country is so sporadic and there are so many different fronts where the Taliban are active that there must have been a mixture of maybe some level of negligence and some level of mismanagement and some level of lack of coordination between different security institutions as well as the central government for the Taliban to be able to infiltrate inside Kunduz city. This is a temporary setback in my opinion. I think the government is confident that they will regain ground very quickly, but the problem is that this attempt at regaining ground will have to take place inside a large city with 300,000 or so population, and it's not going to be that easy.
Mujib Mashal, do you read this as a temporary setback? And tell us more about the sort of information you were getting about the warnings that have been out there for some time.
Whether it's a temporary setback or not, I think the Taliban have achieved what they wanted to, which is to collapse a major city after 14 years. And the unfortunate part is that the warnings were there for the longest time. Even last year, the Taliban managed to surround the city. They got pretty close to the city, and they had strong footholds around the city. And then about 4 or 5 months ago, they made a major offensive on the city, and they were pushed back only when the government relied on very controversial militias. So the government knew that this year, during this fighting season, as the Taliban were trying to carve territory in the north away from their regular stronghold, Kunduz was a city that was a prime target for them. And yet the government didn't do much over the past 4 or 5 months, and it to their embarrassment, and it gave the Taliban a prize that they had been looking for 14 years.
Haroun Mir, how worrying a development is this, both politically and strategically?
Well, politically, the damage is done deeply, and the Afghan national unity government failed at the subnational as well as at the national level. As you said, This is not something that happened by surprise. Kunduz was a challenge for the National Unity Government since the beginning of the National Unity Government, so a year ago, and they failed to address these challenges, and constantly people and the local people, even officials, complained about lack of a proper strategy for Kunduz. And politically, the damage is deep, is big, because people have lost their trust on the National Unity Government. The image of the National Unity Government is shattered, and people are afraid that similar type of actions by the Taliban could happen anywhere in Afghanistan, even in places that we could consider relatively safe. And on the security side, I'm sure the impact will be even deeper, because for the first time, Taliban achieved what the Afghan government developed a narrative that Taliban would never be able to threaten a major population center. In Kunduz is the second largest city in northern Afghanistan, and that is something that, in my opinion, will also impact the morale of the Afghan security forces, because the failure does not come from the Afghan security sector. They have been fighting bravely since the past couple of years, since the full transition of security forces from NATO to Afghan forces. But this is a problem of leadership both at the security level and leadership both at the political level. And this
you talk about the security level, and let me just put this to Omar Sameh, excuse me, jumping in here. There is no defense minister. I mean, how is that feasible in a country that is held hostage by the Taliban?
There is a commander-in-chief and the president. There is an acting defense minister who has almost all authorities to deal with these issues. It's, being in government, you obviously tend to defend what is has to be defensible. But as I said earlier, there's a certain level of mismanagement and negligence that took place. Having said this, we can't say that this is a total failure for a government or for this or that. I think that there is enough blame going around in Afghanistan. We need to focus on the main challenges. The main challenge over the past year has been security. And the Taliban, believe it or not, and we have evidence of this, and their backers in the region thought that the unity government would collapse by December of 2014, maybe first quarter of 2015. That did not take place. They were aiming for that. They had an all-out war, basically, unleashed in Afghanistan. And this has distracted everyone from the other jobs that has to be taken. So today, with Kunduz having fallen, there is hope that it will be regained. There's hope.
I'm sorry, can I just pick on a point that you made? You said the main focus is the security in the country, but as we know, everything was put on hold as your boss, Abdullah, entered into battle with Ashraf Ghani about power, about their own position. What sort of impact did that have on the country?
It wasn't about their own power. This was about an election, and this was about 7-8 million Afghans voting. This had to do with a rigged election, and nobody was going to accept in Afghanistan an election that was so badly managed and so badly run. So the best, under the circumstances, the best solution, the best alternative was for the two top vote getters to get together. That is part of history now. I don't think that nobody is really disputing that. But what we need to do is to make sure that we do have competent people and people who understand Afghanistan, who understand the situation on the ground, who understand the military aspects and dimension of what is happening, and who understand the Taliban. And I think that in some cases, we have people in charge who either are part of old political networks and have allegiances to old political actors, or we have people who are in it for other types of interests, whether monetary or drug interests or anything else. We need to put people who can do the job. I commend the Afghan forces. I think they are doing an amazing job, but we have to make sure that there is accountability. And Kunduz is where we need to start with accountability.
Now, the Taliban seizure of Kunduz coincides with the first anniversary of President Ashraf Ghani's inauguration. It was the first peaceful democratic transition in Afghan history. But the president's been criticised for security failures, as we raised there, rising unemployment, and for failing to combat corruption. Our Kabul correspondent Jennifer Glass has more.
Haji Mohammed's brooms sell for about 80 cents apiece. But business is terrible and many of his customers can't pay their bills. Last year he had great expectations for Ashraf Ghani's government, but now he says it's the worst of times.
There's no work, no business, so I'll have to take my children out of school to work. I wanted my children to be educated, but I'll need them to help support the family.
Ashraf Ghani vowed to fight corruption to help Afghanistan stand on its own feet. The country is still heavily dependent on foreign aid. He promised to support women's rights. His wife Rula has taken a prominent role, rare for an Afghan first lady. The government says it's making progress. Afghans say they don't see it.
We haven't seen any support of women's rights. There's actually more violence. Women without education sit at home. There's no work for them. The youth of this country have already fled. Nothing is left for the people.
Afghans are leaving in record numbers because they can't find work or are worried about security. There have been deadly suicide attacks in the heavily fortified Afghan capital, and the Taliban are fighting in many areas around the country. NATO says 15,000 Afghan security forces died or were injured in the first 8 months of 2015, a 30% increase over last year.
On the security side, the Afghan security forces are struggling with high number of casualties, which is not sustainable in the long run. And politically, the Afghan National Unity Government is not functioning.
It took the government nearly 6 months to agree on cabinet members, amidst rumors of political infighting between President Ghani and his chief executive, Abdullah. And one of the most important positions, defense minister, remains unfilled, with an acting minister making security decisions.
The Afghan president has repeatedly asked the Afghan people to be patient. The change takes time, that things will get worse before they get better. But this time last year, Ghani had two things he lacks now: momentum and the people's support. Jennifer Glass, Al Jazeera, Kabul.
Mujib, not much of an anniversary for Ashraf Ghani. Very little to celebrate, it seems.
Absolutely. I think one of the justifications for the rest of the failures that President Ghani had throughout the year was that this is a year of survival in terms of security. He said it's a year of transition. There used to be more than 140,000 coalition forces, American-led coalition forces in Afghanistan. Most of them have drawn down. There's about only 10,000 in an advisory and assistance mission. So President Ghani, when he was sort of struggling on the economic front, on dealing with corruption, on governance, on all other issues, he had one justification, he had one defense. He kept saying, I am entirely focused on holding the country together in terms of security, as this young security force steps into a responsibility. The blow in Kunduz, the fall of a major city over 14 years, sort of punctures that narrative. It leaves it even, that last excuse he had for the rest of the failures, it highlights that maybe it's more than that. Maybe it's a issue of leadership. That the one issue he had spent all his time on, yet he still couldn't manage to hold a city where the warning signs for its collapse were there 4 or 5 months ago.
Mujib, how much of an impact has it had on the country with NATO forces pulling out, majority of US forces standing down, and the fact that we are possibly looking at a new front line now with the Kunduz battle that's happened?
The impacts are multifaceted, both on the political side, the security side, I mentioned it, but it has also something to do on the economy, because many banks, even public and private banks, some of them were burned down and looted, and so a lot of businessmen in Afghanistan have no more confidence, and in the banking sector will be hurt by this sudden Taliban attack in Kunduz, and people will start fleeing the country. We already see large number of young Afghans fleeing the country, and among the refugees that are flooding Europe, after Syrians, the second majority are Afghans, and this trend will continue, and more people will try to leave the country. So this was not a good time for the government, because the government wanted to celebrate its 1-year anniversary with some positive message. But this, unfortunately, was totally reversed, and now the government is struggling to come out with a message. I listened today to the press conference by the president and the key security ministers. They were struggling to say something, because people now don't buy these almost, I could call it empty talks, because we have been listening a lot of good talks by the president and other key leaders from the national unity government. But when it comes to delivery, the government has failed to deliver, and that is the crucial point. Then people have become disappointed, because in terms of delivery, the government is struggling.
Omar, why has the government failed to deliver? There are still high levels of corruption, growing unemployment, growing poverty. It seems that the only people who are celebrating are the poppy growers.
There are several reasons why we are in what it seems to be a downturn and to be facing some major challenges. I don't want to sound apologetic, but it's partly has to do with what you discussed earlier, this enormous drop in the numbers of troops in Afghanistan, as well as in the funding that Afghanistan was receiving through billions of dollars worth of contracts and investment that was done and made in Afghanistan over the last at least decade or so. We saw almost an 80 to 90% drop all of a sudden, and the previous government and the current government did not predict it and did not manage it very well. So that is one reason. The other reason has to do with the fact that the Afghan security forces, with all the work that has gone into putting them on a good standing, have been in a test mode. They were backed by very strong NATO and US forces until 2014, and for 2015 they have had very small support from the outside world, and they have been on their own mainly, and they have done very well, but it's not probably well enough to be able to take care of a dozen different fronts at the same time. The third reason is that we inherited something that was somewhat very harsh. A system of governance that was not clean, and a patronage system that to this day is trying to undermine the new government.
All right, Mujib, so we've got a government that's been undermined. We've got no peace talks on the table at the moment as far as the Taliban is concerned. We've seen this devastating attack on a very important city of Kunduz. I want to talk about this new front line, the new frontier at the moment, forming along the Tajikistan-Afghanistan border. I mean, there's a lot of talk at the moment of the Taliban, Pakistan and Afghan Taliban joining up with ISIL forces there. Tell us what you make of this new threat.
There's no doubt from our information in the north, in the fighting in the north, there are foreign fighters, whether they're IMU fighters, whether they're Chechen fighters, whether they're Pakistani fighters. But a bulk of the insurgency there still is the Afghan Taliban. The reason why we emphasize that it is such a major victory for them and such a big blow for the government is because they managed to overrun a city that was far from their stronghold. When the areas along the border with Pakistan were insecure, the government kept saying that there's a free flow of insurgents from across the border. They get trained there, they come in, they cause chaos, and then they go back. The problem is that Kunduz is very far away from the border of Pakistan. They managed to strike a blow very far from those strongholds. In terms of the ISIS factor, I think it's a bit too early to tell that whether they can make inroads in the north or whether this Taliban blow to the government will pave the way for their inroads, because let's not forget that the ISIS and the Taliban have actually fought each other pretty bitterly over the past several months over territory. The Taliban do not agree with their ideology. The Taliban see them as intruding on their turf. And in the east of the country, they've fought very, very hard battles with each other. The ISIS threat that emerged in Afghanistan several months ago, they've only now started attacking government forces. For the past several months, actually, they were very busy fighting Taliban. So I think the Taliban collapse of Kunduz, it's too early to tell whether it will have an impact. But I guess other foreign fighters, whether it's the IMU, whether it's the Chechens, whether it's the Uzbek fighters, I think Central Asian nations would be actually very concerned that right across their border there could be an insurgent stronghold which would open the path for these other foreign fighters to amass.
Haroun, with this, what seems to be a growing threat within the country and on Afghanistan's borders, do you think we will see Russia, China and America working closer together to put a lid on this?
Well, indeed, I think this will have a huge impact, particularly on the relationship between the Afghan government and Central Asian republics, because they are afraid of this new phenomenon, which is ISIS, and there's a lot of Central Asians that are fighting in Syria, and the risk that they might return. And if Afghanistan becomes again a prosperous ground for these radical groups, then this is a serious threat to them. But right now, it is too early to say that Kunduz could become again a stronghold of Taliban and other radical groups. I'm pretty sure that the Afghan security forces will take back Kunduz, and they have this capacity. But this risk is looming very high right now, and of course it will impact even China, because we know that ISIS is trying to establish a base in Afghanistan and northeastern Afghanistan. These are high mountains, forest mountains, and difficult terrains. And if they find a footprint in that area, then dislodging them will be very difficult for the Afghan security forces. So, and that is also an opportunity, so that to bring together these countries, and this is why the trilateral meeting between the Afghan government, the Chinese, and the U.S. Foreign Secretary is very important, because at least the regional approach for Afghanistan and the security aspect of it will bring these countries together, because Afghans will not be able to fight alone this menace of coming from terrorism and radicalism in the country.
Omar, I'm just wondering what's going to happen next. I mean, I know you're in New York at the moment for the United Nations General Assembly gathering. I mean, what are we looking at 10 years from now if Afghanistan carries on this path?
As I said at the onset, I think that, and I hope, and I think this is the hope of all Afghans at this time, that this is a temporary setback, that we will be able to regain ground and make the appropriate reforms and changes that are needed in order to have better governance, both at the military level as well as the civilian levels, that the government of national unity is going to become more cohesive and more united. It has become more united if you compare it to 6 months ago or a year ago. The president and the chief executive are much more on the same page now than they were a few months ago. I am somewhat optimistic, cautiously optimistic about the future. I think Afghanistan is going through a very rough time. Part of it comes from the region, part of it comes from mismanagement at home and what we were left with. So I hope that the Afghans and their government will pull together at this point and reprioritize and regroup.
I hope you are correct, Omar Samad, with those final words. Mujib, Mashal and Haroun Mir, thank you very much for talking to us on Inside Stories. It was very interesting. And thank you very much for watching. You can leave your comments via the programme page on our website, aljazeera.com. You can also post your views on facebook.com/AJ Inside Story or tweet us at AJ Inside Story. For me, Jane Dutton, and the rest of the team, goodbye and thanks for watching.